In the fight game, the most minute of mistakes can have the type of consequences that send tremors through the remainder of your career. We've seen it on countless occasions in the past. A promising athlete with all of the talent in the world cut down by a stray shot, the perfect game plan, or simply a touch of bad luck. But sometimes an early career run or even word of mouth can be enough to drive our expectations through the roof, leading to the creation of highly touted prospects. And while this expectation is often completely justified in the end, such pressure often leads to the complete and utter derailing of these hype trains. Whether it's over-eager matchmaking, jitters under the big lights, or completely unexplainable changes in fortune, we're going to use this video to take a look at 5 fighters who simply failed to meet the high standards we had for them upon their first surge onto our screens. Sure, some of these fighters may end up bouncing back from their ongoing streak, but all things considered, it's hard not to be at least a little disappointed in their output so far. So let's get into it. The recently defeated bare-knuckle boxing debutant Paige VanZant was once seen as one of the most interesting strawweight prospects on the UFC roster. Tough as nails and with a very game attitude and high work rate, everything from Paige's look and magnetic personality to her association with Sacramento's Team Alpha Male had us pegging her as a huge potential crossover star for the promotion. And yet, despite going 3-0 in her first trio of Octagon outings with a pair of finishes to boot, when the time came for her to take a step up in competition, a 5-round fight night main event clash with the future divisional champion Rose Namajunas, she unfortunately fell flat by some distance. In fairness to them, how were the UFC to know that they were setting up their golden goose with such an excellent elite talent? Well, it certainly was surprising to a lot of fans when Thug Rose managed to put on a clinic over 5 rounds, beating down VanZant in such a fashion that it was only that aforementioned toughness and game attitude that kept her from succumbing to the finish. Paige would go 2-3 in her final 5 UFC bouts before departing the promotion as something of a disappointment. Is it unfair of us to put the legendary street fighter Kimbo Slice on this list when you consider that he in some ways outperformed our expectations due to his hard work and perseverance? Well, as admirable as Kimbo's memorable run in MMA was for many reasons, the gargantuan levels of hype that surrounded him from its beginnings to its tragic end saw him unfortunately fail quite dramatically on a number of occasions. Whether it was the 14-second Elite XC knockout at the hands of Seth Petrozelli, his Ultimate Fighter drubbing from Big Country himself Roy Nelson, or the bout that saw him axed from the promotion, his TKO defeat to Matt Mitrione, Kimbo just couldn't hang with UFC caliber athletes. And while the reasons for that being the case are completely understandable, it didn't make watching his progression any less disappointing for those who had hoped that he could fill in the gaps enough to become an even bigger star. In the end, the widely loved brawler would fight his final bout under the Bellator banner before passing away due to heart failure at the young age of 42. A man who was deserving of every bit of hype he got due to his backstory and uncoachable desire to be better. But even with that being the case, it wasn't enough to keep him off this list. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment below to keep this train moving. We're looking forward to bringing you even more excellent content this year, so make sure you subscribe now to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. To those of you who didn't experience the rise of Hector Lombard firsthand, it's difficult to fully explain just how interesting a prospect he was when he signed for the UFC back in 2011. As a decorated judo player and a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, this freakishly athletic specimen came into the promotion with a stunning 31-2-1 record, and from early on he was pegged to be a real player within the UFC's 185-pound division. As Bellator's first ever middleweight champion, Lombard was paired up against the tough veteran Tim Boetsch in his debut, expected to announce his arrival to the big leagues with an emphatic performance. However, when the bout's 3 rounds had come to an end, Lombard's 25-fight win streak had come to a screeching halt as Boetsch took home the split decision victory after a truly poor showing from both fighters. Lombard just didn't look to be the aggressive finisher he'd been billed as, and while sure it wasn't a devastating loss by any means, despite winning 3 of his next 4, this highly touted Cuban talent would go on to lose his final 6 UFC matchups in a row, suffering finishes at the hands of Neil Magny, Anthony Smith, and one particularly brutal elbow from the legendary Dan Henderson. He wasn't a terrible fighter by any means, but he without question deserves his spot on this list after well and truly failing to live up to our lofty expectations for him. It almost feels unfair to place a fighter on this list who is widely renowned as one of the greatest lightweights of all time, and yet, despite his legendary run within the now defunct Strikeforce promotion, I couldn't help but include Gilbert Melendez. When the UFC moved in to absorb Strikeforce and all of its rostered fighters in 2012, Melendez's name was right at the top of the list when it came to incoming debutants who were expected to make a splash. At 30 years old and on the back of 4 defenses of his 155-pound title, and with a 21-2 record that saw him avenge each of his 2 losses emphatically, we were getting a prime Gilbert Melendez as he stepped up to take on the UFC lightweight king Benson Henderson in his promotional debut. The champion Henderson would get his hand raised after 5 very close rounds, rounds, albeit with some degree of controversy, but Melendez still seems set to be a real presence within the lightweight title picture. And while he went on to win his next bout on the scorecards, an instantly legendary slobber knocker against Diego Sanchez over 3 rounds, that would prove to be the only win Melendez would ever achieve within the UFC. After a 1-6 record inside the octagon that would end with an ill-fated drop to the featherweight division, it became clear that Melendez's best days were behind him. Indeed, no one can take away from the level of his performances within Strikeforce, but all in all, his pretty noticeable drop-off after landing in the UFC was one of the most unfortunate disappointments of the era as a whole. And finally, we come to the UFC's one-time promotional golden boy. It's very easy to understand why Dana White and his team were so on board, as far as the Sage Northcutt hype train was concerned. He seemingly had everything. He looked the part physically, he had a decorated background in karate, and brought a tremendous level of athletic ability to the table. At 19, he was also the youngest fighter on the UFC roster, debuting against Francisco Trevino with a first-round sub-minute TKO victory that well and truly sent the fans' excitement levels through the roof. And to be honest, despite being a little green and completely mismanaged by the promotion, in my book, Northcutt did alright in the UFC, going 6-2 before being axed by the UFC brass. Despite being on a 3-fight win streak, I just couldn't help but put him on this list because as much as yes, he failed to deliver on the hype for various reasons, if he doesn't in fact get a second chance in the UFC down the line, I think I'll forever remember Sage as one of the biggest what-ifs we've ever seen inside the octagon. What if the UFC hadn't signed him so young, and he hadn't been forced to deal with that step up in competition and his newfound status as a star so early on? At 24 years old, he certainly has all the time in the world to prove his doubters wrong, but make no mistake, he's as deserving of his spot on this list as anyone else. And that'll just about do it for this video. How do you think we did with our picks? We tried to get a little bit of everything in here where we could, and while sure, maybe 1 or 2 of these may be a little unfair all things considered, based on the criteria, I think we managed to do a pretty good job. Do let us know your opinions in the comment section below though. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thank you for watching.